In Nebraska, there's a child with a computer-generated name and without a full identity. One Omaha Metro man says that's the situation with his daughter, and he's trying to change that.
First Alert 6, Joe Harris joins us from the newsroom. Joe, what's going on here?
Well, John and Aaron, speaking with the father and his attorney, they say they've exhausted all avenues trying to get her with the identification needed for insurance and Medicaid. They've even gone to court, but they feel there may be some hope in an Omaha senator's bill.
You can tell being around her, she loves affection, loves being around people. Always smiling and laughing.
Valley resident Jason Kilburn says his 2-year-old daughter Caroline is his world, or at least he wants to call her Caroline. According to the state of Nebraska, her name is Unikite 13 Hotel. Born in Iowa, she spent more than a year in Nebraska foster care after the Douglas County Attorney's Office accused her mother of, among other things, using drugs and continuously neglecting her.
It kills me that I wasn't able to be there when she was born, because it wouldn't have happened like it did.
And while Kilburn now has custody of her, he learned that she has no social security number or usable birth certificate, which he says keeps him from getting her insurance or putting her in daycare.
The document that is her birth certificate has the term for government use only on it. And obviously Jason, not being a member of the government, does not have the ability to use that document.
Family law attorney Josh Livingston says Kilburn came to him for help around 2 months ago.
This is the first time I've heard about anything like this. When I started working with Jason, I was in disbelief at what was happening.
He says he's requested the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services to get the child a social security number, but to no avail. First Alert 6 reached out to DHHS for comment. In an email it said, under the Child Protection and Family Safety Act, specific information related to children in the custody of DHHS or who were in the past is confidential. DHHS is working with Mr. Livingston to resolve this issue. Livingston tried to get Douglas County Juvenile Court to reopen the case last month, but the court said it couldn't.
I'm worried that this child fell through the cracks. And I'm worried that when it became apparent that this child fell through the cracks, nobody with any authority did anything to fix it.
But he says State Senator Megan Hunt's bill, LB 368, could help if passed.
I think under that bill, placing an affirmative duty on the Department of Health and Human Services to provide a birth certificate, to provide a social security number, puts them in a situation where in this situation, there never was one. It requires them to obtain that document, which would be a massive help to families.
Senator Hunt gave us a statement saying, in part, this situation is absolutely unacceptable and highlights a critical failure in our system. No child should be left without a legal identity, especially after being in state custody. The bill is currently in committee. Now, this afternoon, the attorney, Mr. Livingston, told me DHHS had contacted him today to say it's reaching out to the state of Iowa to find out what's the next steps that it would take in getting the child's social security number and birth certificate. Livingston adds the situation is not resolved, but that's progress.
Joe, thank you.